The flame out from the left wing over Elon Musk taking over their absolute favorite social media platform, Twitter, has reached new levels of idiocy. Now, because Elon Musk made the fatal mistake of telling the truth about what happened to Michael Brown in the Ferguson incident, which was, of course, the 100% justified shooting of Michael Brown by Officer Darren Wilson, has triggered the left wing into a freakout, into a frenzy, declaring Elon Musk to be an evil white racist and causing Don Lemon from CNN, of all people, to produce a segment calling Musk out and saying that he was inaccurate in what he said, even though everything he said was truthful. And his tweet even linked Barack Obama's own Department of Justice report, which 100% exonerated Officer Darren Wilson, proved that Officer Darren Wilson 100% told the truth, and debunked and destroyed all of the myths surrounding hands up, don't shoot, and the idea that Michael Brown was this good-hearted, innocent individual who didn't do anything. He was a gentle giant, outspreading the word of Jesus Christ, when all of a sudden an evil white racist cop came down from the heavens, descended upon him, and then killed him just because of evil white racism. But before we get into all of this mess, we have a sponsor for today's video. Let me toss it to the sponsor, and then we'll discuss this on the other side. Have you heard of diet resistance? Well, this is a phenomenon that occurs because your metabolism really starts to slow down as you age, specifically when you get over the age of 35. But luckily for you, I have a bit of a cheat code for you. I have something that will aid you in your journey with the keto diet, and that, of course, is Keto with Justice. This amazing keto powder can help you, as it's helped thousands of people lose weight faster and get that off by prolonging a state known as ketosis. And the great thing about Keto with Justice is that you could actually try this powder for 60 days risk-free, and if you're not satisfied, send it back. Go over to ketowithjustice.com right now, and you could get it at 51% off. That's ketowithjustice.com, ketowithjustice.com.
Here we are at the merch thing, and there's an entire closet full of
secret closet
of hashtag woke t-shirts.
So this all started with Elon Musk quite literally going through all of the closets of Twitter HQ and discovering a bunch of hashtag Stay Woke t-shirts that apparently were printed up by Twitter during the Ferguson riots, which was post the Michael Brown shooting. Now, Elon Musk is obviously making fun of all of these shirts that look like they've never been worn. They're incredibly cringy and horrible. And of course, Jack Dorsey quite famously would wear these shirts around in what he said was his way of supporting his black employees over at Twitter. Also, Jack Dorsey said that he participated in the Ferguson protests just to show you where Twitter was at in terms of being a company. However, as we know, as I've talked about multiple different times, and as I will go over in great detail during the course of this video, the Michael Brown shooting and the left's narrative around it is 100% false. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's shameful that we're still talking about this in 2022. However, Elon Musk telling the truth made a lot of these people angry, and that's why we're going to go over Don Lemon, again, of all people. You'll understand that quite soon, and his response to it. And by the way, Don Lemon has been moved to the morning show, which is not a good sign for a TV personality to be bumped from primetime to the morning show. Obviously, there's a transitional moment happening in his career where people are realizing that Don Lemon, not exactly the best face for your network.
Well, that was Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, mocking a t-shirt the company made years ago in an effort to show support for its black employees and users.
So I'm going to dispute absolutely everything in Don Lemon's segment related to this. So first and foremost, the idea that this was done in order to support Twitter's black employees and black users is nonsensical, it's absurd, it's ridiculous. This was one giant virtue signal about something that was largely spread, and by the way, the misinformation was largely spread through social media platforms like Twitter. The narrative that Michael Brown was this innocent angel who had his hands up and all that was shared via social media. This was a narrative being put forward by Michael Brown's friend, and it was not based in reality.
Twitter founder Jack Dorsey wore the shirt during a 2016 panel with civil rights activist DeRay McKesson. Some critics ridiculed him for wearing it, During the panel, Dorsey mentioned being on the ground in Ferguson for protests over the fatal police shooting of Michael Brown.
By the way, Jack Dorsey should have absolutely been 100% mocked for wearing that ridiculous shirt. He also should have been mocked for appearing with DeRay, the so-called civil rights activist, who is just an absurd human being in multiple different ways. To give you one example of this, there was a character in Planet of the Apes that was wearing something that was similar to a blue vest, and DeRay thought that this character in this movie was actually mocking him personally, even though Planet of the Apes is basically a soft reboot of the original franchise, and this character's outfit was based on an outfit that they had previously worn in another iteration of the movies. So what DeRay ended up doing was comparing himself to a CGI ape for some reason in order to get attention from himself, which really just goes to show you where this guy's mind's at. This is the kind of person who imagines racism absolutely everywhere, so no doubt about it, he was on board with the ridiculous narrative being put forward during the Ferguson riots.
In a now deleted follow-up tweet, Musk noted that the shirts came after the Ferguson protests and repeated a right-wing talking point suggesting that the protests following Brown's death were overblown.
So first of all, it is not a right-wing talking point that the protests following Michael Brown's death were overblown. And nobody on the right wing says those protests following Ferguson, those riots, totally overblown. What people say is that the protest was based on a lie. There was no legitimate basis for the protests. They were ridiculous. The fact that these people burned down stores in their own neighborhood in order to protest a legitimate shooting that was 100% justified under the law and morally justified is absurd in every possible way. These people were out there based on a lie. That is what the right wing talks about, and that's not a talking point, that just happens to be the truth.
And he wrote, and I quote here, "Hands up, don't shoot was made up. The whole thing was a fiction."
True, 100% accurate. Elon Musk, 100% on point, based, whatever you kids want to call it. A+, first class, all the way. I'm on board. I support it. And of course, Elon Musk eventually deleted this tweet, which he should not have done, but also what was attached was something that I share often on this channel, which of course is the 2015 Department of Justice report on the shooting of Michael Brown that cleared him. And by the way, Elon Musk, again, 100% right about it being a fiction. These are not right-wing talking points. These are the realities of it. But let's see how Don Lemon tries to weasel around it.
Now, Musk replaced a deleted tweet with a follow-up tweet containing only the link to a Department of Justice report on Brown's death. Okay, facts first here on CNN.
So what I love about this is that Don Lemon's like, okay, so facts first here on CNN. You just editorialized throughout the whole course of the opening of this segment. You said it was a right-wing talking point that Elon Musk was repeating, that the Ferguson protests were overblown, when that's not what the right wing says. What the right wing says, what reality says, is that these people were rioting over a shooting that was legitimate based on a false account of the shooting that was totally and utterly destroyed by Barack Obama's own Department of Justice, which was being headed up by one Eric Holder. So it's not a right-wing talking point. You didn't go facts first over here on CNN. You immediately editorialized. You tried to castigate Elon Musk as a right-winger for pointing out the reality, even though he was making fun of ridiculous stay woke shirts that Jack Dorsey wore, and Jack Dorsey endorsed the Ferguson riots, thus showing you where Twitter was as a company and where their biases lie.
Musk said that hands up, don't shoot was made up. The whole thing was a fiction. This needs some context. So the phrase hands up, don't shoot became a national rallying cry in 2014 in solidarity with Michael Brown, who's the unarmed black teenager who some witnesses said had his hands up to surrender when he was shot and killed by a white police officer, Darren Wilson.
So immediately we get to, oh, well, we need more context. One of the fact checkers' absolute best tactics for obfuscating the truth. So Elon Musk said clearly and obviously that hands up, don't shoot was fake. It was a fraud. It was a fiction. This is 100% true. This is indisputable. It's irrefutable. It's covered not just by the overwhelming majority of witnesses, the reliable witnesses, but it's also covered by the forensic evidence. On top of that, Notice how Don Lemon frames this as unarmed black teenager being shot by a white police officer. Michael Brown, first and foremost, was 18, technically a teenager, but he was in fact an adult. He's also enormous, or he was enormous, and he was attacking the officer, including going for the gun. So unarmed, as in actively trying to arm himself, teenager Michael Brown was shot justifiably by the cop, would be the truthful version of what we're talking about.
In 2015, the Justice Department cast doubt on the Hands Up account, concluding in a report that Wilson shot Brown multiple times only as Brown was moving toward the officer. This is what Musk is referencing in his tweets. The DOJ did not find grounds to charge the officer, but in a separate report released the same day.
So notice how Don Lemon just glosses over that. He's like, oh, they disputed this, and they said that he only shot him when he was moving towards him, and this is what Elon Musk was referring to. I'm just going to gloss over the fact that Elon Musk was 100% right. However, of course, Don Lemon is leaving a whole bunch of stuff out that is contained in that report, and by the way, also contained in subsequent investigations of Michael Brown, including an investigation that was conducted by Wesley Ball, a DA elected specifically to reopen the Ferguson case, that also concluded that Michael Brown was in the wrong and Darren Wilson was in the right, something that the people of Ferguson who elected him did not take too kindly of, because the myth is out there and so prominent and so public that even multiple investigations, multiple autopsies, multiple examinations of this from different agencies of the government prove time and time again that Michael Brown was 100% in the wrong, and the fiction that is being put forward by people like Don Lemon is just not the case. But since we're doing this all over again, let me give you the details as shown to us by the overwhelming majority of witnesses, who, by the way, did not say things that contradicted the forensic evidence and the forensic evidence, because we need a good foundation to talk about what a liar Don Lemon actually is. So according to this Department of Justice report, which by the way is public, it's free, anybody can read it, and you only have to get about 8 pages into this report in order to know what happened, because that covers the entirety of the forensics within those 8 pages. So again, everybody who tells you not true things about this didn't bother to read it. Officer Darren Wilson intercepted Michael Brown after he committed a strong arm robbery in an intersection, like a little island between the streets, by pulling up his car and asking the two individuals to stop. Wilson was in the SUV, he rolled down his window, and he was greeted by Michael Brown punching him in the face after he tried to open his door, and Brown pushed the door closed. Brown's handprint and touch DNA are both on the SUV door, where one would have pushed it closed. Now, after Brown pushed the SUV closed, the window was down, and Brown decided to swing and throw a punch at Officer Darren Wilson. Brown's DNA is all over Officer Wilson's collar, shirt, pants, and Wilson had bruises and scratches on his jaw and on his neck. Now, Wilson's preference was to reach for a non-lethal weapon, but because of the way he was seated inside the SUV, the only weapon that he could have went for was his firearm, because that's the only weapon that he had access to. Wilson drew his weapon, and Brown reached for and grabbed the gun, and they were struggling for the weapon when the first shot was fired. Now, Michael Brown's DNA was on Officer Darren Wilson's firearm. The bullet, if you track the trajectory, seems like it was fired from where near the holster was, and it was embedded in the door. It also went through the fleshy part of Michael Brown's hand, and there was thermal indica, which are burns from the muzzle flash of the gun, which only occur when you're within 6 inches of the firearm. So everything tells us from this initial exchange, in which 2 shots were fired from within the SUV, that Michael Brown shoved Officer Darren Wilson's door closed, assaulted Officer Darren Wilson. Darren Wilson went for his weapon. Brown then went for the weapon. They struggled for the gun, all backed up by DNA, and the ballistics tells us that Officer Darren Wilson fired the gun initially when Brown's hand was on in front of it, and Brown's fleshy portion of his hand was burned by the muzzle flash of the gun. The thermal indica tells us all that. The soot and all that stuff that was embedded in Michael Brown's hand tells us all that. So Michael Brown was actively trying to arm himself with Officer Darren Wilson's gun, thus presenting himself as a lethal threat. Now, after being wounded, Michael Brown takes off. He runs about 180 feet away from the SUV. Now, Officer Darren Wilson obviously pursues Michael Brown, and we have blood trails from Brown's hand that tells us exactly how far he went. Now, at some point during the course of the pursuit, maybe when Brown, and this is just me speculating, realized that he wasn't going to get away, he then turned around and started running back towards Officer Darren Wilson, and he ran approximately 21.6 feet back towards Officer Darren Wilson. The lying witnesses that said that Michael Brown had his hands up also made the claim that Michael Brown never went to charge at Darren Wilson, but this is totally disputed because Michael Brown's blood is found dripping from his hand in that same pattern further away from where the shooting took place. So Brown started charging Officer Darren Wilson. This is what the overwhelming majority of the witnesses say. And he was facing him when all the shots were fired, according to the forensic evidence. Now, here's where hands up, don't shoot comes from. Although there are several witnesses who stated that Brown held his hands up in an unambiguous sign of surrender prior to Wilson shooting him dead, their accounts do not support the prosecution of Wilson. As detailed throughout this report, some of these accounts are inaccurate because they are inconsistent with the physical forensic evidence. Some of those accounts are materially inconsistent with that witness's own prior statements with no explanation for the change, credible or otherwise, and certain other witnesses who originally stated that Brown had his hands up in surrender recanted their original accounts, admitting that they did not witness the shooting or parts of it, despite what they initially reported to either federal or local law enforcement or to the media. Prosecutors did not rely on those accounts when making a prosecutive decision. While witnesses gave varying accounts on what Michael Brown was doing exactly with his hands, what the evidence shows us is that Michael Brown, when wounded in his hand, was wounded here, not where he would have been wounded if his hands were up, and one of his hands was in a fist or near his belt line, at least in the shape of a fist, which Officer Darren Wilson might have interpreted as him reaching for his weapon, or some people have interpreted he was pulling up his pants while he was running towards Wilson, but it is indisputable that Wilson shot in volleys, according to the audio recording of the incident, not just rapid fire when this young man surrendered, as Brown continually advanced upon him. So yes, the shooting was 100% justified, and it was totally based on a lie. I want you to know all of that up front before we get into Don Lemon's absolute utter nonsense about this case.
Musk is referencing in his tweets. The DOJ did not find grounds to charge the officer, but in a separate report released the same day, it did find evidence of systematic racial discrimination in Ferguson at the hands of the city's police department and municipal court.
So first and foremost, what Don Lemon just did right there was divert away from the issue at hand, which is the issue of Michael Brown, to another Department of Justice report that was put together by Eric Holder and the Obama administration in order to get something, because they knew pretty early on that this was a legit and straight up shooting. They also did not show evidence of systemic racism. What they showed was disparities, which makes a lot of sense because Ferguson is 2/3 black. However, their population is also significantly younger than the white population. I believe the median age or the average age of white people in Ferguson is somewhere near 50, when the average or median age of black people in Ferguson is somewhere near 30. So obviously 30-year-olds, regardless of race, or younger people, regardless of race, are going to commit more crimes than older people. And we also know that black people typically commit more crimes than white people.
Now, the DOJ in its scathing report pointed to the statistics for proof. Black people in Ferguson are twice as likely to be searched during vehicle stops than whites, though white people were found to have contraband at a higher rate than black people.
So the idea that being 67% black and then 85% of the people pulled over are black does not mean systemic racism or anything like that. On top of that, let's talk about the vehicle search and the biases in that. So typically when you're searching a vehicle for contraband, you're searching a vehicle for drugs. And the way that the police do this is they'll typically stake out an area where they believe there is being drugs sold. Now, typically those are areas where black people tend to live more than white people, especially in a city where the majority of your population, nearly 2/3, are black. The easiest thing to spot when you're doing these stakeouts are people who don't belong in that neighborhood. So when you see white people drive through an area known for selling drugs and you pull them over after, obviously your success rate is going to be higher in comparison to when you pull over black people, because black people just happen to live in that neighborhood, so you're not going to get the same level of hit rate, because again, if you're targeting the people in a certain area and a certain group of people live in that area, obviously that's just how it's going to work. On top of that, hit rate isn't absolutely everything, and it can be skewed by a number of other factors. Typically, when you pull somebody over, you ask them to be able to search their vehicle. If black people are less likely to refuse searches, those consensual searches likely yield contraband far less than searches with probable cause. So if white people are more likely to refuse those searches, and you let the people without probable cause go, and then you only search when you have probable cause, that could lead to an increased hit rate.
At least 85% of those pulled over, ticketed, or arrested for traffic violations were black. And the Justice Department said it was money, not public safety, that the department and the city focused on, and black citizens paid the highest price.
So again, what we have here is another example of the Department of Justice report pointing to disparities without actually explaining how those disparities are indicative of racism. Now, first and foremost, there are small town departments that are interested in revenue generation. The Ferguson police were a small town department. They had something like 90 officers on staff total, so obviously by definition this would be a small town. But the idea that, as we said before, that just because you have 67% black population as compared to your white population around 30%, that you would expect to see 67% of black people represented in tickets makes no sense at all for a number of reasons. First and foremost, again, the black population in Ferguson is younger than the white population. Older white people drive better than younger black people. Younger people, on average, drive worse than older people. We all know this. And by the way, we also know that when you get above a certain threshold, as an elderly person, you probably drive worse. But this report also posits the theory that Ferguson is some kind of an island in the middle of the Pacific, when that is not the case. Just because 67% of the people who live in Ferguson happen to be black doesn't mean that 67% of the people driving through Ferguson also happen to be black. One of the things that was noted by the mayor, who refuted certain aspects of this report, was the fact that Ferguson was one of the places that had the large grocery store as compared to the neighboring towns. So people would drive in to go grocery shopping, and those people would be disproportionately black because the black neighborhoods were more closely related to that grocery store, making it their first option, which could juice the number of black people that are on the road at the time. And that doesn't even account for the disparities in driving habits that we've seen between blacks and whites in study after study across the country. So again, this is grievance mongering. This is, oh, look at a disparity, let's assume it's racism, not actual proof of systemic racism from the Ferguson police.
So remember, hands up, don't shoot. After Ferguson became a nationwide protest symbol for police mistreatment of minorities, it was about more than the shooting of Michael Brown. It was about the pattern of police shootings and brutality in this country. And hashtag Stay Woke, which Musk mocked, was how Twitter called out racial injustice, how they wanted to call out racial injustice.
So this is where we get to peak absurdity in Don Lemon's segment. He just said that hands up, don't shoot, which, by the way, was the lie associated with Michael Brown's shooting. The untrue thing that people still believe to this day wasn't actually about Michael Brown being alleged to have had his hands up when he was shot by Officer Darren Wilson, and in reality was about a report that came out a year later that said people got too many speeding tickets in Ferguson, is insanity. Hands up, don't shoot? No. That wasn't about whether or not Michael Brown had his hands up and said, don't shoot. That was actually about how 14 dog bite incidents from the Ferguson police over the course of 3 years actually impacted black people. Hands up, don't shoot? No. That wasn't about whether or not Michael Brown was like, hands up, and then he got shot by Officer Darren Wilson. That was actually about the way that certain tickets for littering were given out by the Ferguson police and nationwide.
Michael would be smiling, that big gentle smile that he always gives whenever he greeted you. Because Michael was a big guy, but he was a kind, gentle soul. And before he left this earth, the day that he was killed, he was out spreading the word of Jesus Christ.
Michael Brown was out spreading the word of Jesus Christ the day that he was killed? No. That wasn't about Michael Brown specifically. That was about the overall pattern of black people in this country being ticketed by the Ferguson police. That wasn't a lie. I don't know why you believe that. Michael Brown as a gentle giant? Listen. I know you have footage of him doing a strong arm robbery, and that's the reason why he got into the encounter with Officer Darren Wilson, but him being called the gentle giant, spreading the word of Christ, and hands up, don't shoot, that wasn't actually about Michael Brown being any of those things or anything like that. That was actually about the Ferguson police ticketing black people for expired registration a little bit too much.
Michael would be smiling, that big gentle smile that he always gives whenever he greeted you. Because Michael was a big guy, but he was a kind, gentle soul. And before he left this earth, the day that he was killed, he was out spreading the word of Jesus Christ.
Now, by the way, one of the reasons why this is so funny is because Don Lemon, back during the Ferguson riots, was called out by these activists for not being a liar enough, for not being pro-black enough. He was attacked repeatedly for misinformation that was considered too pro-police during the course of that situation. So this is a total 180, and let's get a slice of Don Lemon being called out by somebody for not giving respect to him, some local rapper that I've never heard of. Maybe he's a national rapper.
I think what you're speaking about is intentions. And I don't think, especially an organization like CNN, I don't think the intention is to not be fair or balanced. But we live in a world that's run by white supremacy, and that's the narrative and language of the oppressors taking over. On CNN.com right now, you have a story up that says, Ferguson calm until bottles fly. Well, that's inaccurate, because I was there that night, you know what I'm saying? And that's not what happened. Well, and the first thing in the story it says is police chased down men.
Well,
let me finish my point.
But that's not what happened where you were. But
I was there right there with the article, the situation was talking about. I was right there. That's what happened.
But that's not what happened where you were.
That's exactly what happened.
I'm going to let you finish your point.
No, you're not, because you're talking.
Yes, I am. I'm going to let you finish your point.
No, let me finish my point before you talk.
Okay, but let me finish my point
before you talk.
I want to address something you said.
We don't have to have an interview if I can't talk. If I can't talk, we don't have to have an interview.
Okay,
let me finish my point, though. Well, you're interrupting me.
That's what happened. You're going to let me talk. Where you were, and police say you're not seeing everything that happens that goes on. You can't see everything.
I'm only telling you my perspective. Can I finish telling you my perspective, and then you can respond? Because that's how you have a conversation.
I understand that. In order to have a conversation, you have to listen to me as well.
Okay. Well, let me just explain something. I would listen to you if you had the decency. Let me finish. If you had the decency to greet me.
I do have the decency. I invited you to come on CNN.
Let me tell you what happened. You didn't invite me. Nicole invited me. First of all, you came up. You didn't even say nothing to me. You on your phone the whole time. You asked how to pronounce my name, and then you have no respect for who I am. So let me finish saying what I have to say, or else I'm gonna leave.
Okay.
Either I can finish saying what I'm at. You have to say what you have to say. I was out here from my perspective.
So this is one of the reasons why I don't have a lot of hope for where this country is going, because there is more information available now than there was back then, when Don Lemon was actually looking into what police were saying, was actually acknowledging the reality of the situation, and he's gotten worse over time. This whole deflection, distraction to this other report is the same exact weaselly tactic that the Surfs did when I humiliated him for being wrong about Michael Brown. It's what these people always do. That's the reason why they have that second Department of Justice report, because everything they said factually and what Ferguson was really about turned out to be a total and utter lie. So instead, they say, actually, this was just random rage associated with people getting tickets for jaywalking or littering, and it had nothing to do with Michael Brown and whether or not he had his hands up or not. I mean, the chant is, hands up, don't shoot, and this was the narrative being put forward, but trust me, bro, we weren't lying. It had nothing to do with whether or not Michael Brown had his hands up. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Don Lemon backpedaling on the Ferguson lie. Till next time.